Paul George, when we talk about the pool of free agents, now you can argue, and I'm not here to argue with you guys. You can feel how you feel, but you can argue that LeBron James was actually the number one free agent, and I'm not going to push back on that. But the reason why I said Paul George was number one instead of LeBron is because there was a real threat that Paul George could possibly leave the Clippers. I don't think that there was a threat that LeBron James was going to leave the Lakers. I think it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to opt out because LeBron opting out of his contract, he was able to get more with a new deal. So I didn't expect LeBron James to leave. And I still, even though he still didn't have a deal, I still don't expect him to leave. But Paul George was the one that I said couldn't shape this entire landscape of the free agent market. He was the ornament at the top of the tree. And you know that because everyone that had an opportunity to get Paul George went for him. And completely neglected, which we'll talk about a little bit later, completely neglected players on their own team to get Paul George. I said that depending on who got Paul George, that could take your team from playoff hopeful, first round ceiling, second round ceiling, to possibly championship aspirations. That's how good Paul George is. Well, Paul George agrees to a 4-year, $212, which is the max, $212 million contract with the 76ers. Meaning, his stint with the Clippers are done. Now let's talk about the Clipper stint first. Let's first talk about Paul George's stint with the Clippers. And let me tell you why, and let me connect why I started this episode with promotions and why I started this episode with Russell Wilson. I don't know if you guys remember the haul that the Clippers gave up to get Paul George from the Oklahoma City Thunder. It included Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was a future MVP finalist. It gave up a litany of draft picks. It was the definition of a haul. I also don't think you guys remember how and why they got Paul George. I think this is one of the first times in recent memory that I could remember a player literally stick up a team saying, Kawhi Leonard goes, who just won a championship for the Toronto Raptors. He said, I am going to LA regardless. If you don't go get Paul George, he tells this to the Clippers. If you don't go get Paul George, I will go to the Lakers that has LeBron James, that has Anthony Davis. If you do get Paul George, you guys have my services. Which prompted the Clippers to give so much for Paul George. Because Paul George knew this as well. Which means that the ball is in the player's court. No pun intended. So as we sit here, this was in 2019. As we sit here, 5 years later? You got to ask yourself, what did we get from that? Which goes back to my promotion analogy. When you see a movie trailer, you're hoping that whatever you just watched on the trailer is 10 times better than, or 10 times more exciting than what you just watched. Meaning, You see a trailer for a movie that is 2 minutes and 10 seconds, 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Obviously, the movie is not 2 minutes and 10 seconds long. Obviously, the trailer did not just show the whole movie as you hope. So you're hoping that the trailer, if it does get you excited, you're hoping that the movie is much better. But the trailer is what draws you in. The trailer is what gets you to the movie theater. The name Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, especially in an era that has duos and that has trios, that sounds like a championship caliber duo. In fact, you know who else thought that sounded like a championship caliber duo? The LA Clippers, because they would not give up as much as they gave up to get Paul George and Kawhi Leonard if they didn't think it was going to at least get them close to a championship, at least get them in an NBA Finals. But you see, there's also another side to promotion. There's also another side to advertisement. And that is, what if the trailer, what if the transaction doesn't satisfy? What if the trailer is so good, but then the movie is not? Then what happens? As a consumer, you feel empty. You feel like you've been cheated. You feel like you've been lied to in a certain extent. Because the trailer isn't going to tell you that the movie's bad. In fact, the trailer takes the the best parts of the movie to get you to see the movie. As we sit here today, I'm not going to go as far, because I have to sit with it, but I'm not going to go as far as to say that this whole Clippers era, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard Clippers era, was one of the worst eras in NBA history as far as expectation to reality. I'm not going to go as far as to say that the Paul George trade was the worst in NBA history. But what I will say is, we saw a trailer for a movie that drastically underachieved. Now, you can say, well, Jay, of course it underachieved. Injuries play a part in sports, and you can never really predict an injury. So how can you say that it was a failure if they kept running into injury? And for that, I say you're right. But one thing, I will answer that by drawing your attention to the stock market. The stock market is unpredictable. But you know what a lot of people in the stock market go off of? Trends, go off of what they've seen. Kawhi Leonard had an extensive history with injuries before going to the Clippers. In fact, one of the biggest reasons why he's not on the Spurs right now is because of injury. One of the reasons why he was available for the Toronto Raptors and not the Spurs is because of injury. Paul George has had a lengthy battle with his injury. We know the famous Team USA game that obviously drastically changed Paul George's entire career. So, while yes, I think that both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are incredible players, I think that you can put them in that superstar class. Because I do think that if both of them are healthy at the right time, then your team is a championship caliber team. The biggest issue and why we're really talking about this is because it's proven now in 5 years, from 2019 to 2024, they were never able to be healthy at the right time. And while you can say, well, Jay, there's nothing that you can do about it. That's true. But this is also something that you could have seen coming. I'm not saying if I was the Clippers. It goes back to the draft, what I was talking about. A lot of people, obviously, if people knew that Giannis was going to turn into Giannis, he would have been drafted higher than he was. I'm sure if people knew that Damian Lillard was going to be who he turned out to be, he would have been drafted higher. I'm pretty sure if people saw what Kwame Brown was going to be, he probably would have been drafted lower, if not drafted at all. So hindsight is obviously, you don't really have hindsight in these situations outside of a few people. Everyone knew LeBron James was going to be LeBron James. Everyone could have told, yeah, Carmelo Anthony is going to be a pretty good NBA player coming out of Syracuse. You could have told, you could have seen that. I don't think anybody would have saw that Draymond Green was going to be the key factor of a dynasty, you know? So in that sense, obviously you don't know what's going to happen. But I will say this. As we sit here, and Kawhi Leonard has left. Kawhi Leonard is not Kawhi Leonard, I'm sorry. Paul George has left. Paul George is no longer an LA Clipper. A team that had so much promise and thought that this transaction was going to result in high return. As you look up, we got nothing. We had one conference final. And the biggest reason why they lost that conference final is because the team was not healthy, or your stars were not healthy when they needed to be. So I'm not going to go as far as to say that this was the worst era in NBA history for a team, especially when you look at how, some of the early Clipper days. But what I will say is, when we talk about promotion, when we talk about excitement, the promise that this duo had, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, didn't even come close to returning on that investment. Mind you, obviously you didn't know what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was going to turn into. You didn't know what all those draft picks were going to turn into. But you know what you did know is that you were trading for someone who is a star, but has a lengthy history of injury. Pairing him with another player that has a lengthy injury history. And now, Paul George agrees to a 4-year max contract with the 76ers. Oh, you know what? Let me further this conversation. This deal did not happen on what? July 1st. Now, obviously, yes. Technically, the deal happened on July 1st when free agency popped off, Or I think June 30th was when free agency first opened, and then July 1st, the deal was announced, I believe. Early July 1st. This deal did not happen on July 1st, though. This deal happened when Kawhi Leonard got his deal for the Clippers, signing that extension. I told you guys, you know what? I think that I know it's crazy when I say when this podcast gets big, seeing as though I'm 436 episodes. But one of these days, y'all are going to view me as somebody that clearly knows what he's talking about. You know, as a person that studies basketball, studies sports, I see things. And we're going to talk about it a little later. History will tell you everything that you need to know. Everything that's happened in the current 9.9 times out of 10 has happened before in history. History gives you a roadmap of how not to make the same mistakes. Well, I'm going to talk about, remember that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But I said, when Kawhi Leonard got his extension, I said that sets a precedent for the Clippers. That sets a precedent for Paul George. That sets a precedent for Russell Westbrook. That sets a precedent for James Harden. And I said, I bet you I know what the Clippers are going to do. What the Clippers are going to do is they're going to say, Kawhi Leonard is our best player. There's no way that you're going to get a contract that exceeds Kawhi Leonard. And getting Kawhi Leonard's extension out the way essentially set the fate for Paul George and for Russell Westbrook and for James Harden. I said, there's no way, and I said it on this podcast, there's no way that Paul George can expect the Clippers to give him a deal that is more than Kawhi Leonard, because they view Kawhi Leonard as the number one option. They view Kawhi Leonard as the best player. Oh, man, you stayed to the end of the video. I appreciate you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss any content from your boy. You can also go back and watch past episodes, past clips, and don't forget that the Unpopular Podcast, new episodes drop every Wednesday and Saturday. Appreciate you.